Alright guys, today we'll cover what airgun tuning is, why we do it, and how to go about it. We'll talk about the 5 golden rules of tuning, as well as 6 key things to remember while you're doing it. We will explore both the upper and lower limits of the FX Impact M3 Compact 22 here, as well as give you a rundown of the gun to get you familiar. I will share with you the story of 11 custom tunes across 2 barrels and 4 types of ammo. We will field validate 6 of those tunes at distances between 50 and 150 yards, and we'll hear from 6 winning pro staff shooters on their tuning methods. This has been 5 months in the making, guys. Sit back, relax, grab something to take some notes with, and we'll be back in a minute. AEAC is made possible by Air Venturi, Hawksport Optics, Diana Airguns, FX Airguns, Pro Air Federation, Air Arms, Sports Match Rings UK, H&N Sport Pellets, Air Marksman Airgun Accessories, and JSB Predator Pellets. And you guys know the best way to thank them. Alright, before we get too deep into this, let's cover parts you need to know and get you a little familiar with the M3. And that's Bobby. My next door neighbor mowing his lawn. Alright guys, what's a regulator? Easy. A regulator takes a higher varying air pressure and turns it into a lower steady one. Alright, now a good example of that would be like the air in this airgun bottle. As it's consumed, the pressure in here drops from high to low. The regulator's job is to take that varying air pressure and keep it consistent downstream for your airgun's hammer and valve. And the regulators, there are 2 of them in the M3, are both adjustable. Now try to think of your gun's regulator as the master flow control into the system. The more you turn it up or open it up, the more overall flow potential you're charging the gun with. But that's also more air that downstream your hammer and valve have to contend with. Now it's really not as bad as all that. They're perfectly equipped to do so. But there's a balancing act that needs to take place there between reg, hammer, and valve that I want you to put in the back of your mind and start thinking about. And we'll come back to that. Alright, so what's the valve do? Simple. The valve takes the steady flow of air coming out of the regulator and turns it into a metered pulse so that your gun is able to use it. In other words, it takes the psh and turns it into a. And the valve does this by way of the hammer. The hammer collides with the valve, briefly opening it. Pew pew, pew 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 pew, pew 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 pew. You guys get it. So those are the parts you need to know to be able to follow along for the remainder of the video. The regulator, the hammer, and the valve, and the delicate balancing act that needs to take place amongst the 3 of them. Whoa! 120 yard stability test FX 25 grain. 120 yard stability test FX 25 grain. Alright guys, I'm going to lay some heavy definitions on you, but don't let them freak you out. Their teachings will be at the core and foundation of this video throughout, and I promise by the end you'll have a good understanding of them. Alright, what is tuning, why do we do it, and how do we go about it? Tuning is the process by which we adjust the gun into a state of harmony and accuracy for any ammo or weather conditions. We tune to control performance, so that we can achieve the best accuracy, stability, and efficiency no matter what. And we go about it all with an organized approach, searching and testing for system harmony at an accurate velocity. Now don't worry, you don't have to memorize all that. I'll leave my entire video outline in the description down below. And the shot charts I'll post in a thread over at the Airgun Nation forum, and link that down below too. I didn't like that one, I flinched on it. And remember, I'll teach you this stuff as we go, so hang in there with me. There we go. But first, let's get you a little acquainted with the M3. The FX Impact M3 is manufactured by FX Airguns in Mariestad, Sweden. It's available in 4 models, a 500mm barreled compact, which is what this one is, a 600mm standard, a 700mm sniper, and an 800mm 35 cal. Available calibers across the lineup are 177, 22, 25, 30, and 35. And as you can see, there's really not a whole lot to it once you get all this stuff off. Get away from that camera. Get out, get. Now our compact here comes with a 1 in 24 twist choked barrel called a Smooth Twist X Superior Liner. Now that's a pretty slow twist rate, so that barrel's primarily designed for pellets, but that doesn't mean that it won't work with slugs too. Oh, nasty little bad cows. Very bad cows. Now if you want a slug gun or to primarily shoot slugs, FX also offers their Smooth Twist X Superior Heavy Liner. Now this one's a 1 in 16 twist, so that's a faster twist rate. It's got less of a choke on it, so that as well is more ideal for shooting slugs, but that doesn't mean that it won't work with pellets. Now my findings throughout this video is that this is definitely the better slug barrel. Now the guidelines that FX gives us for a 22 cal is that for 26 grain and below, you probably want to use the included 1 in 24, and for a 26 grain and above, it's probably best to play with the 1 in 16. Go to your room. Go to your room. You too. You guys are in timeout. Go on. Yeah. Now the pathway of airflow through the M3 is out of the bottle, through the first reg, through the second reg, into the power plenum, through the valve, and out the barrel. All right, guys, really simple. Reg 1, its only job is to take the varying air pressure in this bottle and step it down just a little bit for Reg 2, making Reg 2's job easier. In other words, helping this regulator to be more precise and more consistent. And that's really important because Reg 2 is the regulator that the valve sees. Remember, the valve is what gets smacked by the hammer, briefly opening it, sending that metered pulse of air into the barrel. Now in front of the valve here is what's called a power plenum. These are basically like the lungs of your air gun, and it's where your valve takes its big gulp of air from when it's smacked open by the hammer. Now on the M3, all this stuff is super easily adjustable. Reg 1 is adjustable right here at the bottleneck, and its readout is on this side of the gun. Reg 2 is adjustable just behind the trigger, and its readout is here. Hammer spring tension is adjustable over here via these two wheels. This one's a macro adjuster, this one's a micro adjuster. Coarse adjustments to the hammer spring, fine adjustments to the hammer spring. By having them both, the capability of each is amplified. The two together make up what FX calls the quick tune system. Now this gauge over here, that's just your bottle pressure. Man, what's a guy got to do to get some work done around here? All right, the valve adjuster. Now I want you to think of the VA as a bump stop or a travel limiter for that valve once it's knocked open by the hammer. You see, by making small adjustments to the VA, we can ultimately control how long the valve stays open and ultimately how much it opens, thereby trimming away waste air and promoting efficiency, consistency, stability, and ultimately accuracy. And lastly, the barrel's sleeve has a couple of transfer ports for you to pick from. A pellet port and a slug port. But more on that and everything else later. So, we've learned some important parts. We've talked about what tuning is and why we do it. And we've learned our way around the M3. But how do you actually tune? In other words, what are the sequential steps you take to easily and successfully go about it? Now, the very first thing I want you to do is to pick a reg pressure. Don't care what it is, so long as it's on the lower side of what you've heard is good and proper. Right now, if your gun's got one regulator, just go ahead and pick a pressure and set it. But if it's running two like the M3, remember we're working Reg 2 because Reg 2 is the regulator that the valve sees. Reg 1, that step down reg, just go ahead and set it 30 to 50 bar higher than Reg 2 for now. Now, according to FX, the closer to a 30 bar differential that you are between the two regs, the more precisely Reg 2 will reset. And the closer to a 50-60 bar differential, the faster it'll reset. So you'll just have to decide which one of those is more important to you and lean your tunes that way. Now, no matter the gun you have, I want you to back way, way off that hammer spring tension and slowly begin to bring it up until you see velocity stabilize. Now, where that speed flattens out is the ideal reg pressure for that velocity. Now guys, I'm telling you, this balance point is a really easy place to hammer past. So you want to slow down, take your time, and always try to work around that balance point or below. You don't want to get above it. Once you get up above it, that's kind of an area where you get into hammer bounce and waste air, and you'll start running into accuracy problems. Now speaking of accuracy, once you feel like you've got that hammer spring tension balanced out nice and flat with that reg pressure, it's time to start thinking about putting some lead on paper. Like way down range, I'm talking minimum 50 yards. The reason for that distance is you want to be able to see clearly what's going on with your projectile. Now, of course, obviously you want to see if it's accurate, but is it flying straight to the hole? Or is it wobbling or hooking? Or do you see that skirt flash in the sun? If you see any of those problem signs, or if the accuracy isn't there, you're not at the right speed. Now you can use the adjustable hammer to hunt and peck around a little bit for improved accuracy and stability at that reg hammer balance point, but if you don't see what you want, ultimately it's going to require a reg pressure change. And I want you guys to start thinking of the regulator as the velocity throttle for your air gun. More reg pressure creates more airflow potential into the gun's system, hence the ability to generate more power and speed. And of course, less equals less. But with each new reg pressure setting, you're gonna have to do the work to find that reg pressure setting's ideal balance point and harmony with the hammer spring. And as we know, that's an easy thing to accomplish. Remember, we work the hammer spring from low to high, gradually increasing it until things balance out and you see that velocity stabilize. And where you do is that new reg pressure's ideal speed. So at the end of the day, we're working reg pressure and hammer spring tension up and down together, searching for those balance points at a velocity that brings us the accuracy and stability we're looking for. So now that you've achieved system harmony at a speed that brings your M3 relative accuracy, it's time to start trimming things out to eliminate that waste air and further push accuracy. And we do that via the valve adjuster. Now remember, the VA is your travel limiter, or bump stop for when that hammer smacks that valve open. And it's a very sensitive device, meaning that very minor inputs to the VA can return big rewards when it comes to dialing in accuracy and really tightening up that shot chart. It accomplishes this by eliminating valve over travel, or an excessive duration of time that the valve remains open, thereby increasing efficiency and decreasing any excess air that may emerge around the projectile as it leaves the barrel, upsetting it. And all of these systems working together in harmony are what will bring your M3 incredible efficiency, consistency, and accuracy. And as we go, we're going to test, evaluate, and repeat, and eventually build us out a tune around the velocity, which ultimately gave us the best performance. All right, guys, this is what it actually looks like in real time, hunting down a reg pressure, hammer spring, balance point. Let's try 90 bar and see where things level out with an 18 grain. All right, looks like reg 1's currently set to about 110 bar, and reg 2's at 75 bar for a 35 bar differential. Got to remove the bottle to get to the Reg 1 adjustment screw, which if we're going to be at 90 on Reg 2, we'll set this one to 140 for a 50 bar differential. That'll give us a nice, fast, clean reset on Reg 2. All right, now the Allen just drops right in there and counterclockwise opens up the reg, thereby increasing its flow and pressure. If you want to reduce it, just go clockwise. Now an interesting factoid on the M3 and Reg 1. They're both rated for 300 bar. I know, it says 250 on the side of the gun, but that's a rating for the bottle that comes with the M3. You get yourself an aftermarket one like this Air Marksman that's rated to 300 bar, and you can fill to 300 bar. The gun will take it, no problem. And the M3 will tune out just fine that way, although I'm not really into that. You can see that I've got a little ways to go with my R1 adjustments, so we're going to speed things up a little bit. Another thing to take note here is that Reg 1 adjustment screw is actually pretty sensitive. Basically move it like the smallest amount you could possibly detect, and that's going to be like a bar or two. Sometimes more, unfortunately. That movement you saw me make just there was probably like 5-10 bar. It's important to dry fire these regs at least 2-3 times after an adjustment to give them a chance to settle out. Sometimes it'll take like 4 or 5 shots. Same thing will go for your hammer spring adjustments. They'll definitely take a couple of shots to settle in. When I'm tuning that hammer spring for real, I'll often give them 4 or 5. Why that is, I don't know. That's just the way it is. So close. I'm at like 139. Alright, I'm going to spare you the rest. Hey folks, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for flying M3 Airlines, and we are finally arriving at 140 bar. Perfecto. See, it's fun and easy, guys. It just takes a little bit of time. Stow your tray tables and lock your seats in the upright position. Yeah. 1 down and 1 to go. Now adjusting Reg 2 on the fly is a much simpler endeavor. It's just up and down. You don't have to take anything apart. Which is a good thing because you're going to be fiddling with that one quite a bit. So much so that it's probably a good idea to leave yourself a little extra headroom between that Reg 1 and Reg 2 step down pressure. In other words, when you're first starting out, maybe leave yourself a differential of 50-60 instead of 30-40. That'll keep you from having to remove the bottle to reset Reg 1 so much to make sure you got at least 30 bar in between the two. Now there are some important rules when it comes to adjusting Reg 2 that you'll want to be aware of. Don't exceed 170 bar and try to make your adjustments slowly and gently. This will help preserve the O-rings on the inside of the regulator adjustment screw, which if you do tear up, it's not the end of the world to replace them. I did wear mine out after about 5,000 shots and over 25 tunes. But I got a feeling that most of that wear took place when I was trying to adjust Reg 2 up around 170 bar, which I did just for the good cause of exploring the limits of the 500mm compact, which in real life, if I needed to make that much power, I'd have just bought the standard or the sniper. With their longer barrels, quite low reg pressures will make quite big power. This one's quite happy for 18 grain pellet use in the 80-90 bar range, which just doesn't stress anything at all. Now something that's really cool about Reg 2 is that you can adjust it both up and down under pressure. There's no need to degas or anything like that. Just keep your adjustments at around 1/8 of a turn and you'll be just fine. Dry firing 3 or 4 times in between if you're going down, or closing the reg, or reducing the pressure. Clockwise equals dry fire in between. This will help keep the extreme pressures on the low side inside the regulator when you're making those adjustments. And we've arrived at 90 bar. Now getting the hammer spring tension balanced out with 90 bar is just as easy. As previously directed, just back way off that hammer spring tension to start. Finding that harmonious sweet spot balance point's a lot easier coming up from underneath it rather than down from over the top. And remember, you kind of want to be running at it or below anyway. Too much hammer for the reg pressure will lead to hammer bounce, which will just cause you all sorts of headache, and you'll see it in your shot chart. It'll look like alligator teeth and it'll sound like crap, as will be your accuracy. So I'm rushing this process a little bit for the sake of keeping your attention. Of course, after all, this is YouTube. So when you're often doing this on your own, I'd recommend slowing down and taking your time and enjoying yourself. Because it really is fun and easy. The hard part's doing all the work to find a velocity that's nice and stable for your given reg pressure, and then getting out to the range and discovering that the accuracy just isn't there at that speed. But like I said, you can hunt and peck around a little while you're out there using the micro adjuster to search up and down various velocities at that reg pressure to see if you can find one that flies straight. If you can't, no big deal, just give it a little bit more reg and a little bit more hammer to work that velocity up and see what happens. And of course you can go the other way too, just remember to work them up together and work them down together. All the while just trying to stay around the balance point to keep your ES and SD nice and tight. Which coincidentally also keeps waste air emerging around your projectile as it leaves the barrel at a bare minimum. Which is really, really important to realizing stability and accuracy. So you'll notice I'm not even fooling with the valve adjuster here, and already I'm realizing great success. Currently I've got it backed all the way out or counterclockwise until it actually made contact with the shroud, and then I turned it in clockwise a quarter turn to keep it off the shroud while I was shooting. You don't want any funky resulting harmonics to muck with your accuracy. Now if your M3 is a standard or a sniper with a 600 or 700 millimeter barrel, that shroud's going to be backed out quite a bit further, so you're going to be able to unscrew your VA quite a bit more. So with your compact here, you're a little bit limited. But it didn't slow me down one bit, coming up with a bunch of excellent tunes and incredible accuracy as a result. Just remember this about the VA. You want to leave mucking with it to the very, 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 very end of your tune. In other words, exhaust yourself balancing things out with a hammer spring first, and then use the VA in very small doses to help bring it all together. Namely at the range, when you're looking around for accuracy. Hey, look at that, 886 feet per second, 3 times in a row. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking again. We have arrived at system harmony. 885 feet per second with an 18 grain is the ideal balance point for a 90 bar reg. See how easy it is, guys? You totally got this. Don't let any of it intimidate you, and have fun. Alright guys, let's get you through these tunes in groups. So the big story with the 16 grain was trying to tune to a speed that would run stable, but at the same time was fast enough to help with wind drift. All the while getting along with the M3's propensity to make big power. Initially I was trying to make all that work and bring it all together up at around 880 feet per second, which I'll show you here in a few minutes, but ultimately the stability really wasn't there at that speed, especially in the wind. And the harder I pushed it, the worse things got, especially up around 890. The ass end of that pellet kept wanting to come around in flight, and it was Wobble City all the way to the target. So 850 it was. That's where I got the best accuracy and pellet stability. And the challenge therein came from trying to manipulate the M3 into a decent shot chart at a 70 bar reg. Kind of like trying to put Prius tires on a Hellcat, but the M3 pulled it off. What I believe made it challenging to run an extremely tight ES and SD was a couple of things. For one, 70 bar is around the lower operating threshold for Reg 2, and 70 bar is what it needed to be. Going to a 75 bar reg kind of balanced out at around 860, and an 80 bar reg balanced out with the hammer spring at around 880. Further making things challenging is the M3's largish pellet port, which really is optimized for making big power, as I'm sure is its hammer weight. So you put all that together and you're kind of running along the rugged edge of system harmony, but the M3 pulled it off. And really I thought that was cool, having a 22 cal that tuned out at 25 foot-pounds almost as happily as it'll tune out at 58. But hey, I'll take a 13 ES and a 3 SD and a 1/4 inch 50-yard group any day of the week. And as you can hear and see, it's a little breezy out here. And this is a 16 grain pellet. And that is why we tune. Speaking of the tune, here it is. 117 shots at 25.5 foot-pounds, average velocity 851. ES and SD 13 and 2.92. R1 at 100, R2 at 70. Macro adjuster at 9, micro adjuster right on number 3. Valve adjuster cranked all the way down to just below 4 indicator bars. Remember guys, I'll have these tunes all posted up for you at the Airgun Nation forum, and that link will be in the description down below. So this is that 880 tune I promised you. Made on a warm day and demoed here on a cool morning. So it's going to lose a couple of feet per second, but pretty much it's right there. Now, even though you're going to see all these pellets land into a half-inch-ish hole 50 yards away, what you can see is that their path to target is actually quite unstable. Now you may be saying to yourself, no big deal, they got there okay, the group looks pretty good, but the problem is, if the wind's been any higher, they would have been all over the place. Which brings us to the first golden rule of tuning. Know the needs of your projectile. Diabolo-shaped pellets versus redesigned-shaped pellets versus slugs. Their needs are all quite different, you know. Your Diabolo-shaped pellet normally likes to run between 850 and 880 feet per second, and pushing it much faster than that normally induces wobble, which you won't always see at 25 yards, but you certainly will once you stretch things out to 50. Sometimes you can get away with 890, but not normally. Redesigned shaped pellets will often stabilize as low as 850 and sometimes even up and around 1,000 and everywhere in between. But normally 850 to 950 is the sweet spot. Slugs are normally best run up around 950 to 1050. However, I personally have seen them do well up around 1200 even, but I was recently at NAC, the Northeast Airgun Classic up there in Epping, New Hampshire, and the guy that won the 300-yard slug challenge was actually pushing an Altero slug to 850. And I can only imagine what that slug speed was by the time it got to 300. And for the record, he was shooting an FX Impact M3. By the way, check out the ES and SD on that one, guys. When you get that valve under a little bit more pressure from a little bit more reg on one end and a little bit more hammer spring on the other end, makes it run pretty hard, pretty tight, pretty clean. That's why I think you'll see a lot of guys shying away from the lower reg pressures. By the way, here's a best of both worlds, 860 feet per second, 75 bar tune. 153 shots at 26.18 foot-pounds, right at 861. All out of a 300cc bottle. That could be a good one, guys. If you're going to shoot the 16 grain inside of 50 yards, that could be a good one. The 18 grain pellet tuned out and performed phenomenally. Almost seemingly no matter what. It's almost as if they designed the M3 around it, which I'm sure they did. And it's certainly the pellet I'll be running out of my compact from now until the end of time. The flexibility was honestly amazing and I had a lot of fun with it. And as you can see and hear around me, the wind barely bothered it once tuned out right. So back to the having fun part, I put myself together a nice tune at 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the way, this pellet performed admirably, all the way from 865 up to 880. By the way, this was back in March when in the state of Florida, it's not uncommon to have 85 degrees one day, and that night it dipped well into the low to mid 40s, so I took full advantage of that. I set the gun, the pellets, the magazines, all of it outside overnight, covered it up with a towel, and let it chill itself down to 48 degrees. Because I was quite curious to see how it would run my 86 degree tune down at 48. And to my shock and surprise, without touching a thing, the M3 spat out another insanely good shot chart. That's a 38 degree swing, folks, so if you're looking for a gun and a tune that'll carry you through spring and fall pretty much no matter where you live, I think you found it. Guys, a quick mentionable before we get into some more golden rules of tuning and another 18 grain shot chart. The new H&M Barracuda 18 actually performed really well with this tune too. Okay, golden rule number 2, stability trumps accuracy. As we saw with the 16 grain, you can hook and wobble your way into a decent group at 50 yards, then scatter by the time you get to 100. So when you're out there doing your thing, don't get fooled by good groups. Watch and see what that pellet's doing on its way to target. All right, number 3, speed trumps tune. So far, we've already seen some ESs and SDs that are a little bit looser than others and performed just as good, if not better, than a tighter ES and SD. The point is, they're both important, but I don't want you to hyper-focus on extreme spread and standard deviation. At the end of the day, a relative velocity that gets you accuracy is more important. The pros dial on the fly all the time. Find the right speed, and then build a tune around it. Speaking of tunes, a 1-bar bump on Reg 2 can make all the difference. In the case of the 18 grain, it took an ES and SD from 11 and 2.58 all the way down to 7 and 1.83. The lesson therein is that small movements to not only the hammer spring, but the Reg 2 one way or the other can make a world of difference. So when you're getting close on a tune and you find your thoughts deeply entrenched in what you're doing with the hammer spring or the micro adjuster, don't be afraid to take a look at that Reg 2 and move it up or down a bar and see what happens. You might just get rewarded. The 25.39 grain redesigned pellet was a toughie, and I struggled with it for quite some time, seemingly no matter what I did. And I really don't think it was the pellet. I think this really had a lot more to do with trying to push so much power and air out of a little 500mm barrel. By nature, that's going to be pretty disruptive to the projectile as it's trying to leave the bore. Further confusing things was that I was seeing accuracy with both the 1 in 24 and 1 in 16 twist at velocities as low as 850 feet per second and as high as 950. But it was Wobble City all the way to the hole, and geez, probably at least 3 and 5 every time. So I phoned a friend. 6 of them actually, 6 industry guys that are really good at what they do. Justin Welch said to try 970 with the 1 in 16. Ernest Rose said 865 to 900 with the 1 in 24. Justin Jacobson also said to try 970 with the 1 in 16. Newman Buck said 870 to 880 with the 1 in 24. Ken Hicks said 950 to 970 and that it could go either way on the barrel. And Keith Gibson, he didn't know. He just runs the 30 cal. So that just confused me even more, and then it dawned on me that those guys are all probably running the 700mm sniper, not the 500mm compact. But as you can see from the lab radar data, I finally figured it out. 960 was the number with the 1 in 16 heavy slug liner. And as we saw earlier with the steel drum demo, set out to 120 yards, those pellets were flying stable all the way. Here's the tune. 47 shots at 52.08 foot-pounds, average velocity 961. Extreme spread 8, standard deviation 2.25. Reg 1 180, Reg 2 149, macro adjuster on 16, micro adjuster right on number 4 plus 23 clicks. VA max minus 1/2 a turn. Golden rule of tuning number 4. Tune the reg with headroom for temperature swings. It's okay to reg up a little high to take full advantage of the macro and micro adjuster, the quick tune system on cold mornings and or hot afternoons. It's okay to sacrifice a little efficiency or shots to do so. In other words, it's okay to be okay with a little variation in your ESSD and shot count in the name of field flexibility and taking full advantage of the M3's tunable platform. So after playing around for a few weeks and discovering that I could get just about any of these slugs to work upon getting the velocity and tune right, I decided to have a little fun with it and started looking for a slug that I could run at full burn. And the one that cooperated at a 55 foot-pound tune out of the 500mm was the H&N 217 30 grain. As you can see, I had to pull the moderator to get it to work. Leaving it on there was really mucking with accuracy. And once again, I'm guessing that had something to do with the massive air blast coming out around the slug as it left. So if you want to run a moderator, no problem. Just pick something lighter and tune it down. Really sorry about the lab radar here, guys. For whatever reason, it was really struggling to track the slug all the way out to 150, but hang tight here just a minute. It will capture shot number 5, and you'll be able to see what's going on with speed at the 150 yard mark. The way I came to this tune was to pretty much push everything to the max on the compact with the 25.39 grain redesigned pellet, averaging it out at just about 1,005 feet per second, and I'll show you that tune here in just a few minutes. It's pretty obvious what my point of aim was, and I'm fairly certain that shot number 2 went right through it, although I cannot confirm, even looking at the footage ultra close here at home. But what I can confirm is that before turning the cameras on, I shot pretty much the same group. See the way, that's at least 9 out of 10 and probably 10 for 10 in about a 2-inch hole at 150 yards, which quite frankly surprised me. Up until that day, I hadn't seen that out of the 500mm. Although, as we've all seen all over YouTube, that's quite common performance for the M3, 6, and 700mm. That's standard in the sniper. So here's how my max power slug tune started out. 29 shots right at 57 foot-pounds via pushing the 25.39 grain pellet to an average of 1,005 feet per second. Surprisingly, those 29 shots came out of that little 300cc bottle with a nice tight ES and SD 7 and 1.71. And as mentioned, I pushed everything to the max. Reg 2 right at 170. Macro adjuster at 16. Micro adjuster at number 5. Plus 7 clicks. Which, by the way, is the most I could go. Any more than that and the gun wouldn't cock. Valve adjuster max. Touching the shroud and then backed off 1/4. So in a search for a little less kaboom so I could really tighten things up, I came up with this tune. 5 less clicks on the micro adjuster this time. 5 plus 2 versus 5 plus 7. Average 992. ES 5. Standard deviation 1.40. Doesn't get any tighter than that, folks. Picked up a little efficiency. 36 shots this time at 55.5 foot-pounds. Which brings us to golden rule number 5. Ammo matters. A lot. Find the one the barrel likes. And when big money's on the line, sort for reliable accuracy. Look out, Tanya. I think that one went right through the hole. That one that I missed. All right. Things I want you to remember while you're tuning. Try to let your reg setting be your primary velocity throttle. For the most part, your hammer spring tension setting brings the rest of the system into harmony with your reg setting. All you're really trying to do with tuning, guys, is balance out forces within the gun to a chosen velocity, while all the while trimming away waste air. If you're close on a tune and struggling, just a tad more or less reg pressure, or just a tad more or less hammer spring tension can have a real stabilizing effect on velocity. Obsess over ES and SD not because of shot-to-shot consistency, but because the tightness indicates an efficient valve, closing with minimal waste air behind the projectile. Work slowly from low to high on the regs and hammer. It's really easy to overshoot the ideal. Harmonics really matter to accuracy. Try to experiment with the position of your scope, your bipod, different moderators, barrel fasteners, tensioners, harmonic barrel tuners, etc. Here, what kind of gun is this?
Yes, this is a FX Impact M3 in 30 caliber. I'm shooting 56 grain sand pellets at 870 feet per second. Might end up lowering that speed a little bit. We'll see.
Why?
Not quite sure that I'm exactly tuned for that weight. Like I might want to go a little slower and let them stabilize a little bit more.
You seeing a little wobble?
Sometimes, but I know guys are shooting them at 820 like laser beams, and I just didn't want to go that low. But that might be the recipe.
Yeah, right. Do you want to speak a little to like your tune and how you set up the gun and the regs and stuff?
Yeah. Normally it would be a lot lower, but since I'm shooting 56 grain pellets, I actually raised the rear reg to 140 bar versus like if I'm shooting 44 grains, I'm down at 100 bar.
Okay.
And the hammer is about 3/4 of the way towards max. The valve is all the way out. And the second reg is about 20 feet per second, or I'm sorry, 20 bar over the rear reg.
20 bar difference in between.
Yeah.
Is that normally where you like to be?
It depends. If I'm shooting for bench, yes. If I'm shooting PRS where it might be super fast or something like that, I like to put a little more space in between them so it refills really fast.
What's a little more space for?
Like I'll go 50 to 100 bar
50 difference.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, because really all that first reg is doing is taking pressure off of the rear reg.
So it can work better.
So it can work better, last longer, not wear out so fast. So, I mean, it's really, I just think of the first reg as a buffer. It just takes some of the weight off.
A little bit of a step down.
Yeah,
That's really it.
Exactly.
And then if you want quicker cycling, quicker breathing in between shots,
then I give it more space so that this plenum is getting extra air all the time versus having to ask for it from that.
Gotcha. And did I hear you right saying you leave the valve adjuster alone, just pretty much wide open? On
this one, yeah. But usually what I'll do is like I'll go wide open, I'll get to about 20 feet per second faster than I want to shoot, and then I'll bring the speed down with just the valve, not touching the hammer at all.
Okay, so you'll tune it for a higher speed, and then kind of squeeze on it with the valve adjuster.
Because when I do that, I tend to see tighter feet per second spreads than if I just tune right up to it.
Right up to that balance point.
Yeah, I like to just come back just a little bit.
And it doesn't give you any ability to compensate for temperature change either when you kind of go right there too, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's huge, like out in Utah.
And what I do, once I have the valve setting the way I want it, I just, like, this gun's being shot on hammer setting 13, and depending on how cold or hot it is, I might be on 14 or 12, but it's always one of those three. And like, you would never notice for hunting, but when we're talking about millimeters, mean thousands of dollars, you notice little things like that happening. Try and
Can I ask a pro like you? You know, I'm always wondering. These guys are always wondering. How really important is extreme spread and standard deviation to 100-yard repeatable accuracy? Like, I know it's important.
It's important. Like,
to what extent?
It's the same thing I was saying with the hunting wise. You can have a 30 foot per second spread and not even notice it. But for punching X's, I like to get it down under 10. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between 10 and 5.
That's what I was after.
But yeah, just get it under 10 and it's just gold.
Is there a difference between 10 and 20?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
Yeah, I do.
You heard it from a pro guy. Excuse me. Excuse me, bird. Can I ask you, you know, like you mentioned it's a 30 caliber. Can you speak to them a little bit about the round you're shooting, the speed, maybe how you set the gun up in terms of regs and philosophy with regs and hammer spring and how it all balances out? Maybe even touch on the VA a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I knew that we were going to be away from my normal stopping grounds, so I tuned the gun down real low reg pressure, so that way I could get a lot more shots per fill. I'm normally the high reg pressure guy because I don't like turbulent air, but since we're so far from home and I know I was going to be borrowing tanks, I tuned it way down with the same velocities with the lower reg pressure, so that way I could get more of a shot count. And with that Air Marksman 700 bottle on there, that really helped out with that as well. I'm doing 30 cal, 44 grain JSBs, and I'm pushing them right at 880 to 900 in that range. I normally change on the bench during the conditions. I'll go 2 or 3 clicks on my hammer wheel if I see any inconsistencies and find that that ticket spot,
a little sweet spot,
to find that sweet spot to get that accuracy for those cards.
Can I ask a regulator question?
Yeah.
On a 30 cal, for a guy like you, you mentioned low reg pressure, you mentioned high reg pressure.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Okay, so right now I'm running at 110 on the reg pressure, 110 bar. I normally run it closer to 140 to 150, which shuts your valve a lot faster.
And why is that important?
So why is that important to me? Because a pellet has this big skirt on the back. Well, if you get a short burst of air after the pellet has left the barrel, kind of, just it gives it that little wobble and that you don't want. So, and without air stripper in there, without an air stripper, you will get that. And that's why I like, with the higher reg pressures, you close that valve before the pellet leaves the barrel, and you don't take a chance of it having a burp after the projectile leaves the barrel.
So you're doing most of your trimming before you even get to the VA, it sounds like.
Pretty much.
Okay, and do you use the VA when you're out there shooting?
Sometimes I really don't like. I'll find a sweet spot with that and just leave it alone most of the time. But it just depends. If I change those clicks and it's not working, I will start to turn that valve and close that dwell time of that valve as well too.
Okay, try to pinch it a little bit there too. What about the first regulator? You were talking about Reg 2.
Yes.
There's another regulator up here. What do you set? Go ahead.
So
what do you set that at?
I delete that.
You just open it up. Like take it out.
So yeah, it's got a Crawford and Lip Reg delete in it right now.
Okay.
I use this gun mainly for precision, other than bench rest. So I'm kind of multitasking with it. So with that Reg delete, I'm able to shoot a lot faster for precision and stuff like that, so I don't have to worry about the refresh rates and stuff like that.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then if I get on a good win streak and I want to, you know, haul butt up that card, I can do that now because that I don't have that first reg in between those two chambers slowing me down.
So by opening it up, you're making for a much bigger breath of that plenum in between, a quicker breath of that plenum in between shots.
I'll sacrifice a little bit of ES and SDs for being able to follow up a lot quicker on my shots.
Okay, if you were running this reg, and that ES and SD was really important to you, like let's say you're just a long distance guy, just a 100-yard guy or whatever.
Yep.
How much difference do you like to see between those regs?
I like to see 60 bar and above.
Okay.
That's 60 bar and above. Whenever you have that front reg, if you're too close, what you're doing is you're filling from a little bitty chamber that goes to the gun into your power plenum. So if your reg is too close, it's sitting there pulsing back and forth because that center chamber is filling before, as the rear reg is dragging the air through, the first one's filling up because it's such a smaller chamber. So if you have them set real close, you will get actually worse inconsistencies.
A 30 cal impact M3 in a sniper configuration like this, that's coming to that comes out of the box at typically what speed and where are the regs usually rated?
So I'm not intimately familiar with 30 cal because we don't get them in South Africa, but I believe that they are set around 880 feet per second, 860 to 880. I think you would probably know better than me. Actually.
No, the 22 is the one I've been dissecting over the last.
I believe it's. I know the best results normally come like 860 to 880.
Okay.
With 44, 45 grade JSBs.
Okay.
And the reg I think is around 80 to 100 bar.
Okay.
On these M3s.
Perfect. Can we have a little learning moment with these guys on the valve adjustment up in front? That's a real enigma for a lot of people. And so what's your teaching with that?
So my advice with the valve adjuster is do most of your setup with the hammer spring and the reg, get that where you want it, and then you can start backing off the valve. What you don't want is the valve to be open for too long. You want the valve return spring to, once the valve opens, you want it to close it again relatively quickly, because having the valve closed quickly makes your setup more efficient, and you'll actually hear the difference. Like sometimes if your valve's backed all the way out and you've set your gun up and you're taking shots, it's a bit louder. You start screwing your valve adjuster in and you'll actually hear the gun get quieter even though your velocity is staying more or less the same. You want your valve to close before the pellet leaves the end of the muzzle. So
that extra air isn't making it tumble.
And that turbulence can affect the way the pellet leaves the muzzle, and it can just waste air and just create more vibration and all that negative stuff. So.
And the way you find it is to listen for it, if I'm hearing you right, for the most part.
Yeah, well,
or you
can hear it, but what I'm doing most of the time is I'm looking at my chronograph, and I'll turn it. And I'll get to the point where, okay, I'm starting to see my velocity reduce a bit, maybe like 10 feet per second from what it was before, and then, okay, cool, I'll just leave it there.
So it's almost like you overtune for a little bit higher so that you can kind of pinch on it with that VA.
Yes, exactly.
Very interesting. All right, ladies, time to go. It's not safe for you up here. Come on. Need you guys on the north side of the property here. Come on. Yeah. No, we're not going that way. Everyone out. Go on. Get. You too, sister. You too. Yep, everyone out. Come on. Get.
So I shoot 22 caliber pellets because, as far as you know, all bench rest, as for now, I shot with pellets. And I use GSB Monster Redesigns, but that's a separate story because old ones were just perfect, and I have some, I think 20-25 teens left, and I use them only at the most important competitions like that one, Rocky Mountain Airgun Challenge, Extreme Bench Rest, and I'll use them on Pyramid Air Cup this year also. But the situation is that I can't use them during my shooting practice. And since 2019, those pellets, their quality and their accuracy became much lower. And to tell you the truth, it demotivates me a lot because I can't use good pellets to practice. And my usual results with those new GSB Monster designs is 205, 210, so it's rather low. But every time I take old ones, I go to the shooting range, to competitions, it shows very good results. So I wish that GSB company could hear me and get those old GSB Monster redesigns. I assure you, all sportsmen shootings who shoot bench rest, it's just their dream to get those pellets back. Please do it, guys. If we speak about regulator, so it is usually 145 bar. If we speak about spring, summertime, pin probe is used here. There's no any additional weight, so pin probe is a part of slug power kit. I don't use any extra weights here, just no need, because I shoot at 970 feet per second, and it's quite enough to get good result. In winter time, it's rather challenging because FX Crown has very small plenum. It's about 15 cubic centimeters, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, and it's hard to reach that speed in winter, so I have to use either tungsten hammer, either shorten the valve spring that allow me to get there, but tungsten hammer gives me too much vibration, so I don't like it. So winter practice is a bit challenging, but all other times, late spring, summer, early autumn, it's just awesome, at least for Moscow time and climate.
Can I ask a winter question?
Yes.
So at what temperature have you been able to get the Crown to perform? At what low temperature?
Look, the lowest temperature I ever tried to shoot with it is minus 40 Fahrenheit.
Did it work?
It worked. It worked fine. I couldn't reach the speed I need, but there were no any leaks, and it worked as it should be worked.
I heard you say 30 cal.
Yep.
And so do you want to speak to projectile and speed and maybe even touch on your tune too?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a bad habit of like just trying new stuff during competition. I don't prepare at all, really. And so when the Zan pellets came out about a month ago, I hadn't had a chance to shoot them, but I finally got a set of the new VR100s, and I did a side-by-side test against the 44 grain JSBs, and I'm seeing like a 3-inch difference of less wind drift. 3 inches, like in the same wind.
They're that different of a pellet, huh?
They're that different. So there's some things in this tune that I won't tell you guys about because I don't want to give away all my secrets.
Sure.
But when you get them tuned right, they buck the wind like no other pellet that I've ever used. I can steer that pellet everywhere I want it to go.
Let me ask you this. In the hierarchy of tuning importance,
Yep.
would you say speed, tune, or harmonics is probably the most important ingredient there?
So I read an article by Brian Litz a while ago that talked about shot dispersion. And I think a lot of times when you're tuning, when there's no wind and you're just stacking them right on top of each other, but if that same pellet at that tune gets thrown off by that wind, I will statistically like to take a projectile that can buck the wind better, because you could have like a 1.5 inch 100-yard group, but it bucks the wind by 3 inches versus stacking a pellet. But if that pellet's getting pushed off by 6 inches, statistically you're going to be able to keep your shots in that 8 range.
So none of the three that I mentioned.
None of the three.
More so.
That's for me.
Load and barrel.
With now, because of these pellets, it's like now if I can find the perfect tune, I find the harmonic tune, but just using these pellets by themselves, you have a statistical advantage because of shot dispersion over everybody else.
Very interesting. What would be the advantage, you know, if we've got somebody new watching and they want to learn how to put a competitive rig together, What do you gain by adding some of these aftermarket accessories here, like some of this Air Marksman stuff? You know, what does the Donnie FL do for you?
Tames down the bark and takes away all that unnecessary air. This rail here adds your weight. You got so much rigidity with this backbone. I mean, I push hard. Sometimes after a good day of shooting, my cheekbone actually hurts because I push down on my gun so hard.
When you're shooting, it's not a light hold at all for you.
No.
You're rocking it.
The hand hold, my grip is light, but my cheek push is hard.
How about the shoulder? What are you doing in the shoulder?
Medium. I would say light hand, medium shoulder, heavy cheek. Yeah.
So you're just trying to ground that gun.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Huh.
So I am shooting the Zans, the Bentress 56 grain Zans at 865. First reg's at 150, second reg's at about 125. 120, 125.
Pretty close, okay.
Yeah, and it just loves them out of that speed. Still working on it a little bit because those Zans are fairly new, but I mean,
this is a Zan pellet you're referencing.
Yes.
The new Zan pellets.
Yeah, the Zan pellets. Yeah, and she'll be dialed in for RMAC coming up. But
so we'll see you in June or
yes.
July. I forget
June.
what it is. In June.
June.
This year.
Yeah.
Middle of June.